Is Catherine Howard haunting Hampton Court Palace? That's the long-standing claim, which has become so famous that the building's gallery is called the Haunted Gallery in her honour. What's the evidence for this, though? Does the story match what we know about the real Catherine? How far back can it actually be traced? And what did the results of a scientific experiment carried out there in the year 2000 conclude was likely to be happening? Let's start with the ghost story attached to this room, which any quick Google search will throw up for you. According to lore, on occasion, the ghost of a young woman wearing a white dress is seen rushing down the corridor, only to turn back, clothes in disarray, a terrible look on her face, and shrieking in despair. At other times, it is just her piercing screams which are meant to be heard coming from the vicinity. This is supposed to be Queen Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, who was arrested at Hampton Court Palace in November 1541 and ultimately sent to the scaffold at the Tower of London the following February on charges of treason and adultery. See my videos all about her death and the mystery surrounding what happened to her remains to learn more about that. Legend has it that when she realised the danger she was in, she escaped her guards and ran screaming down the gallery, trying to get to Henry, who was in the nearby chapel hearing mass, to beg for mercy. She was caught before she could get to him, though, and dragged back, while Henry sat in his pew and ignored her. Her ghost is meant to be replaying that scene. Did said scene even happen, though? Catherine's biographer, Gareth Russell, says that if it did, then it occurred before or during Mass on the 6th of November 1541, before Henry left the palace. David Starkey, meanwhile, dismisses the whole idea, saying in his biography of all 6 of Henry's wives that there was no time for hysterics or for her supposed last desperate attempt to see him in the chapel gallery. Indeed, when her husband left the palace, she was aware neither of his departure nor that anything was wrong. Antonia Fraser is also deeply sceptical, noting that the original incident is unconfirmed and that a reconstruction of the first floor of the Tudor Palace shows that Queen Catherine could not have reached the chapel from her own apartments in this manner. The palace's own website confirms this observation, even though another of its pages repeats the ghost story and its supposed origins. No one actually states where this story originated, though, nor did a quick check throw up the answer for me. The lack of a primary source and the fact that the timings and the internal geography of the Tudor-era palace don't match Catherine and Henry's movements or possible movements indicates that this whole thing is fiction. So where does this story of the woman in the white dress come from, and why has it been attached to Catherine? Well, the earliest mention I could find of it in any written record only comes from 1881 in a book written by one Ernest Law, who lived at the palace and was its historian. Of course, that doesn't mean there's definitely no written record any earlier than that, but I checked 3 online book depositories and came up with nothing. Then ran a search on the phrase Haunted Gallery in the Times Digital Archive and found nothing any earlier than 1886, while a search in the Burney collection of newspapers, which goes back to the 17th century, also came up with zilch. I also located this floor plan of the palace from 1800, in which the so-called Haunted Gallery is so unremarkable that it actually doesn't even have a specific name. It's just another corridor which I've marked out for you by slapping a red history calling watermark on it. It's only in Law's works that I start to see it get its spooky moniker, as you see here where it's highlighted in yellow. In the 1881 book, he repeated the seemingly baseless story about Catherine trying to see Henry, and then gave a detailed account of the woman in the white dress. He offered no source for either. 4 years later, he published another book in which he repeated his claims, like literally just copied his text from one book to another, but then he added what he called some recent and very convincing evidence on the matter. Before I reveal what it was though, if you're enjoying this content, please remember to give the video a like so that YouTube knows you approve, and subscribe with the notification bell switched on so that you're kept up to date with my uploads. You can also find me on Patreon, where I share bonus material including early access to ad-free videos, mini podcasts, and recommendations for other great history content on the web. This week I'll be discussing with my historical figure and time traveller patrons another bizarre ghost story from Hampton Court Palace, when what appeared to be a ghost was actually caught on CCTV. Patrons also have access to my Patreon archive for the tier they're on and the tiers below it, so if you're listening to this video long after its release, don't worry. As long as my Patreon is still there, the bonus podcast will be too. I also have an Amazon storefront where I provide curated lists of history-themed movies, TV shows, books and gifts, and both are linked below for you, as is my Instagram account. You'll also find a link there to my website, historycallingofficial.com, where you can sign up to my mailing list and get a free download giving you 5 quick and easy tips to spot good and bad history books before you start reading them or shell out any money on them. And spoiler alert, Law's book wouldn't make the cut. Law's very convincing evidence was in the form of supposed witness testimony from 2 women. The first was a Mrs. Cavendish Boyle, who he tells us was then living in an apartment next to the gallery, and who claimed that one night several years earlier she was awoken from a deep sleep by, quote, a loud and most unearthly shriek proceeding from that quarter, followed immediately by perfect stillness. She didn't tell anyone about it, but another woman, Elizabeth Lady Eastlake, who had been visiting Mrs. Cavendish Boyle, also reported that she had heard the same thing one night during a trip. These ladies, says Law, had provided him with written statements, which he didn't quote, and given him permission to use their names. All we have here, in fact, is hearsay, with no actual confirmation that these 2 women ever said any such thing. Even if we believe that they told Law these stories, though, what have we got? They might have been lying to get attention, or just for a joke, or in cahoots with Law to help boost the reputation of the palace and attract more visitors, for it was already open to the public even then. Even if they weren't, we're still left with the recollections, years after the events, of 2 women who admitted they'd been in bed asleep when the supposed events occurred, so might well have dreamt them. There is absolutely no evidence that a ghostly shriek ever happened. They didn't even report hearing it on the same night, so they couldn't corroborate each other's stories. Even if they did both hear something, there are lots of explanations far more mundane than the supernatural. Another person in the palace larking about is one. An animal shriek is another. I don't know if you've ever heard cats or foxes shriek in the middle of the night, but I have, and I can tell you it's like nothing you'll hear anywhere else, and it sounds horrible. It's not otherworldly though. Furthermore, the palace has large gardens with plenty of places for animals to live. Finally, even if you're a die-hard ghost believer, see what I did there, why should this be the ghost of Catherine Howard? We've already established that there's no real evidence that she ran down the gallery, nor did she die at Hampton Court Palace, nor is she buried there. There are also no confirmed portraits of her, something I discuss in my video all about the supposed images of her, so how are people able to recognise her as Henry's 5th Queen? I think she's just been connected with it because she's a famous name. The whole thing is as flimsy as a house of cards. Law most certainly did not have very convincing evidence on the matter, no matter what he said. Nevertheless, he continued to repeat the story in other publications over the course of the rest of his life. He died in 1930, and this helped it to gain traction. What about later sightings and spooky incidents which have been attributed to Catherine? Read the Guinness Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, published in 1994, and you'll find another completely unreferenced story that, when the gallery was open to the public, an artist sketching a picture repeatedly saw a ringed hand in front of the picture. The artist drew what he saw, and the jewel in the ring was later identified as belonging to Howard. Right, so there's no way the artist, if he ever even existed, could have copied the ring from a supposed portrait of Catherine or invented it by reading one of the inventories of her jewels. Again, there's nothing in the way of real evidence here. The website of Hampton Court Palace reports that 2 unnamed people, about whom we know nothing, fainted on the same spot in the gallery in 1999, as though that proves something. Again, I find it ridiculous. Maybe it was just a warm day in a crowded tourist destination. Maybe they had other health issues. Who sees a couple of people faint and immediately thinks, oh, that must be that pesky royal ghost again? The most interesting evidence, to my mind at least, is a scientific study carried out on the gallery in the year 2000 by several psychologists, and then published in the British Journal of Psychology. I've left the article's details below for you, as well as a little BBC News article in which one of the investigators was interviewed and discussed their findings. They had a warder at the palace catalogue the spots in the gallery where people most often had weird experiences, and designated those the so-called haunted areas, with other areas used as control spots. 432 individuals volunteered as test subjects and completed all the necessary questionnaires set by the scientists, and they were sent around the gallery in groups. They reported 189 odd experiences there, ranging from temperature changes to dizziness, headaches, bad smells, and some sort of emotional response. Interestingly, the experiences were concentrated more in these so-called haunted spots. Having monitored the magnetic field in the gallery, the researchers found that the variance of the local magnetic field was significantly greater in haunted rather than control areas, and there was a significant relationship between the magnetic variance and the mean number of unusual experiences reported by groups of participants. These results seem consistent with previous research suggesting a relationship between local magnetic field activity and haunt reports. Magnetic fields weren't the only thing they pointed to as a possible explanation for these strange goings-on. They also considered that group contagion effects may have influenced what people reported. In other words, if the person standing next to you says, "I feel something weird here," you're more likely to decide that you feel it too. For an extreme example of this, see my video on the dancing plagues of the 18th century, where people literally danced to death. The psychologists admitted that the experiment had other inherent flaws though, including potential prior knowledge of haunted spots on the part of participants, though they tried to quantify and offset this through the questionnaires by asking people what they knew about the gallery's supposed haunting. In the end, they came to the conclusion that their experiment didn't support the hypothesis that prior knowledge had a big impact on results, saying there were no significant differences between the proportion of unusual experiences reported in the haunted areas by groups of participants with high and low levels of prior knowledge. What they did suspect, though, was that as well as a potential link with very low magnetic fields, quote, even subtle psychological and physiological changes occurring in a context that might suggest paranormal events, e.g. occurring to a person who believes in ghosts, occurring in a location with a haunted reputation, may lead to that person making a paranormal attribution to what they might otherwise interpret as an ambiguous stimulus. In their conclusion, they said that their data suggests that environmental factors such as magnetic fields, lighting, temperature — they set up thermal cameras and noted that some parts of the gallery are draftier and cooler than others — and even the size of a location affect whether people feel a place is haunted, even if they are responding to them without realizing it. So let's sum this whole story up. There's no evidence that Catherine Howard ever ran through the haunted gallery to get to Henry prior to her arrest. Even if she had tried to reach him, she wouldn't have passed through it due to the geography of the Tudor-era palace. She also died and was buried elsewhere several months after her arrest, so why would it be Hampton Court Palace that she would haunt? Furthermore, there's no obvious evidence of a haunting story involving a woman in a white dress prior to 1881, though Catherine died 339 years before that. Was the former Tudor Queen just too busy hanging out in the afterlife up until then and neglecting her haunting duties? The evidence, in inverted commas, provided by Ernest Law at that point and later is incredibly flimsy where it exists at all, and basically comes down to 2 second-hand reports that a couple of sleeping women heard screams at some indeterminate time from an indeterminate location, just supposed to be the gallery, and from an indeterminate source. Later tourists to the gallery have certainly made reports of strange feelings, but when the location was put to the test in 2000, a variety of environmental and psychological factors, from magnetic fields to lighting to social contagion and people feeling what they expected to feel in a particular location, were found or suspected to be at play, both in this haunting and others. I know that even in spite of all the plot holes in the story and the reasons I've given for people's supposed experiences, some are going to say, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. Why are so many visitors reporting strange things if there's nothing there? To that, I would say that of the hundreds of thousands, and that's a conservative estimate, of people who pass through this space every year, the vast majority don't notice a thing. Those having what they're calling ghostly experiences are very much in the minority. If you're interested, I've been to Hampton Court Palace twice and didn't feel a thing when I was there, though the second time I was all over the gallery for maybe 15 minutes, taking pictures of its portraits, filming the footage you've seen here, and getting beeped at by alarms for leaning in too close to the famous family of Henry VIII portrait which hangs there. Lots of other people set off the beeps too, by the way, so it wasn't just me. The lighting is low to protect the portraits, for which reason I actually got much better pictures of the family of Henry VIII when I saw it the following year in the King's Gallery, and there are numerous windows and open doors into other rooms, so it can indeed be a bit cold and drafty, but there's nothing spooky about it. The entire haunting story seems to be built on hearsay and people jumping on the bandwagon to get attention. My conclusion is that Catherine isn't haunting the gallery at Hampton Court Palace, and I don't think anyone or anything else is either. What do you think, though? Do you believe there's something weird going on at Hampton Court, or is this a load of Victorian tosh, invented to get more tourists through the door? Let me know below, and remember to vote in my community tab poll on whether or not you believe in ghosts. For more spooky history, try one of these options next. And until next time, keep learning.